You people always think you can sit wherever you want and ignore the police. Stand up and show me your ID right now. On what should have been a quiet afternoon at a downtown cafe, an arrogant police officer decided to intimidate and assault a calm black woman he believed was powerless, never realizing that the woman he was humiliating had the direct ear of the state attorney general, and that one phone call would end both officers' careers before the day was over. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Jefferson Square sat at the center of downtown like a small island of calm, surrounded by glass office buildings and steady city traffic. Outdoor tables lined the sidewalk outside Maria Delgado's cafe, shaded by wide umbrellas that fluttered slightly in the warm afternoon breeze. Office workers sat with coffee cups and laptops, enjoying a rare, quiet break between meetings while the distant hum of the city drifted through the square. At one of the corner tables, Dr. Alicia Grant sat alone, reviewing a stack of documents neatly spread across the small iron table in front of her. Her posture was relaxed but focused, one hand holding a pen while the other turned a page filled with handwritten notes. The sunlight reflected softly off the polished surface of her leather briefcase resting against the chair beside her. To anyone passing by, she looked like another professional taking a moment to review paperwork between appointments. Few people would have guessed that Dr. Grant spent most of her career standing in courtrooms arguing civil rights cases that reshaped policies across the state. Maria Delgado stepped outside the cafe with a tray of drinks, pausing briefly beside Alicia's table. "Still working, doctor?" Maria asked with a friendly smile. Alicia looked up and returned the smile. "Just finishing something before my next meeting." Maria nodded approvingly. "Let me know if you need anything." As Maria returned inside, a black patrol cruiser rolled slowly past Jefferson Square, its engine humming quietly as it circled the block. Inside the vehicle sat Officer Brent Callahan and his partner, Officer Tyler Brooks. Callahan leaned forward slightly behind the steering wheel, scanning the sidewalk with the restless attention of someone who expected trouble even when none existed. Brooks glanced down at the patrol tablet in his lap while reading dispatch updates from earlier in the afternoon. "Looks like it has been quiet today," Brooks said. Callahan did not respond. His eyes had settled on the outdoor cafe tables across the square, specifically on Alicia. She sat calmly with her documents spread neatly across the table, unaware that the officer watching her had already begun forming assumptions. Callahan slowed the cruiser as they passed the cafe again. "What is it?" Brooks asked. Callahan nodded toward Alicia. "That." Brooks followed his gaze and frowned slightly. "She's just reading paperwork." Callahan shook his head slowly, his expression hardening. "Does not look right." Without another word, he pulled the cruiser to the curb and stepped out onto the sidewalk, already convinced that the quiet woman sitting at the cafe table had somehow become his problem. Officer Brent Callahan walked across the cafe patio with long, deliberate strides, the heavy thud of his boots against the sidewalk immediately drawing attention from the nearby tables. Conversations softened as people noticed the uniform approaching with unmistakable purpose. Dr. Alicia Grant remained seated at her corner table, still reviewing the documents spread neatly before her. She sensed a shadow fall across the papers just before Callahan spoke. "All right," he said sharply, planting one hand on the edge of the table. "What exactly do you think you are doing here?" Alicia looked up calmly, her expression composed despite the abrupt interruption. "Good afternoon, officer," she replied politely. "I am reviewing documents while I wait for a meeting." Callahan's eyes moved slowly across the papers, the briefcase beside her chair and the pen in her hand. None of it seemed to satisfy the suspicion already forming in his mind. "Looks like you are loitering," he said. Alicia folded the top page neatly and set the pen down. "I'm a customer of the cafe." At that moment, Officer Tyler Brooks stepped up behind Callahan, glancing quickly at the table before leaning slightly closer to his partner. "Brent," he said quietly, "she's just sitting." Callahan ignored him completely. His attention remained locked on Alicia. "Identification," he demanded. Alicia did not react with anger or alarm. Instead, she reached calmly into her bag and pulled out her driver's license, holding it out for him to see. Callahan snatched the card from her hand and studied it with exaggerated scrutiny. Alicia Grant, he read aloud. His eyes narrowed slightly. Attorney. Alicia nodded once. That is correct. Callahan handed the license back, but did not step away. Instead, he leaned closer, lowering his voice in a tone meant to intimidate. You know something, he said, people with fancy titles sometimes forget that the rules still apply to them. Alicia met his gaze evenly. Which rule am I breaking? Callahan tapped the table with 2 fingers. Suspicious behavior. Brooks shifted uneasily beside him. Brent, dispatch, did not say anything about suspicious behavior. Callahan waved him off without turning his head. I know what dispatch said. Nearby, Maria Delgado stepped back outside the cafe doorway after hearing the raised voices. She looked from the officers to Alicia with visible concern. Is there a problem? Maria asked. Callahan turned toward her sharply. Stay out of this. Maria frowned. She has been sitting here quietly for 20 minutes. Callahan's jaw tightened as more people at nearby tables began watching openly. One man discreetly lifted his phone, holding it low but clearly recording. Callahan noticed the attention and straightened his shoulders. Stand up, he ordered suddenly. Alicia looked at him calmly. Why? Callahan reached down and grabbed her arm, pulling her up from the chair before she could respond further. Papers slid from the table and scattered across the sidewalk as the movement startled several people nearby. Brooks stepped forward quickly. Brent, that is not necessary. But Callahan had already begun guiding Alicia toward the patrol car parked at the curb, convinced he was about to prove that the quiet woman sitting at the cafe had no authority to challenge him. Officer Brent Callahan tightened his grip on Dr. Alicia Grant's arm as he guided her across the sidewalk toward the patrol cruiser parked at the curb. The sudden movement sent several sheets of her legal documents sliding across the pavement, the papers fluttering slightly in the warm afternoon breeze. Conversations around the cafe patio stopped almost entirely now. Every nearby table had turned to watch the scene unfolding. Alicia did not resist as Callahan moved her toward the car. Her posture remained steady, her breathing calm despite the forceful way he handled her. Officer Tyler Brooks walked beside them, clearly uncomfortable with the growing attention from the crowd. Brent, Brooks said quietly, this is getting out of hand. Callahan ignored him. He pressed Alicia's shoulder against the side of the cruiser with unnecessary force and turned her toward the hood of the vehicle. Hands on the car, he ordered sharply. Alicia placed her palms gently on the warm metal surface without protest. Her voice remained calm. Officer Callahan, there is no reason for this. Callahan leaned closer, his tone filled with irritation. You should have thought about that before giving me attitude. Several people along the sidewalk had already pulled out their phones. One young woman standing near the cafe entrance lifted her device higher, openly recording now. Maria Delgado stepped outside again, her expression tight with concern. Officer, she said, she was not causing any trouble. Callahan shot her a hard look. I said stay out of it. Maria folded her arms but did not step back inside. The tension along the sidewalk continued to rise. Brooks glanced around at the growing crowd and lowered his voice again. Brent, everyone is watching. Callahan straightened and pointed toward Alicia's scattered papers on the ground. You see this, he said loudly enough for the crowd to hear. Suspicious documents. Alicia turned her head slightly toward him. Those are legal briefs. Callahan laughed under his breath. Sure they are. He grabbed one of the pages from the ground and glanced at the printed text without really reading it before tossing it back down. Looks complicated, he muttered sarcastically. Alicia remained composed. They are court filings. Brooks crouched briefly and began gathering some of the papers from the sidewalk, clearly attempting to de-escalate the situation. Callahan watched him with irritation before turning his attention back to Alicia. You know what your problem is? He said. Alicia did not answer immediately. Callahan leaned closer again. You think you are smarter than everyone else. Alicia looked directly at him, her voice quiet but firm. No, officer, I think you are making a mistake. The words seemed to irritate him even more. Callahan stepped back slightly and reached for the handcuffs hanging from his belt. The metallic clink cut through the quiet air. Brooks froze for a moment when he saw the movement. "Brent," he said carefully, "do not do that." Callahan lifted the cuffs and spun them once in his hand with a smirk. "Relax." Alicia watched the motion calmly. "Officer Callahan," she said quietly, "you still have time to stop this." Callahan's smile only widened as he stepped closer with the handcuffs raised, completely convinced that the calm woman standing in front of him had no power to challenge what he was about to do. Officer Brent Callahan held the open handcuffs in front of him, the steel rings glinting in the afternoon sunlight as he stepped closer to Dr. Alicia Grant. The quiet tension that had settled across Jefferson Square seemed to tighten around the small group gathered near the patrol car. Alicia remained steady with her hands resting lightly on the hood of the cruiser, her posture calm despite the escalating situation. Around them, several people stood along the sidewalk watching, their phones raised to record every second of the confrontation. Officer Tyler Brooks shifted uneasily beside the cruiser door. "Brent," he said quietly, "this is not necessary." Callahan did not even look at him. Instead, he focused entirely on Alicia, clearly convinced that the moment belonged to him alone. "You said I was making a mistake," Callahan said with a mocking smile. "Let us see how serious that mistake really is." He reached for her wrist. Alicia did not pull away, but she turned her head slightly toward him, her voice calm and measured. "Officer Callahan, there are witnesses here. I suggest you reconsider what you are doing." Callahan glanced briefly at the people filming nearby and shrugged dismissively. "Good," he replied. "Let them watch." The metal cuff snapped shut around her wrist with a sharp click. A ripple of murmurs passed through the small crowd. Maria Delgado stepped forward from the cafe entrance, clearly alarmed. "Officer, she has done nothing wrong," Maria said. Callahan pointed sharply toward the cafe. "Go back inside." Maria did not move. Brooks ran a hand across his forehead, visibly uncomfortable now. "Brent, please slow down." Callahan ignored him again and reached for Alicia's other wrist, pulling it gently behind her back. The second cuff closed with another metallic snap. Alicia stood quietly beside the cruiser, her wrists now secured, but her expression unchanged. She lifted her eyes toward Callahan and spoke in the same calm tone she had used from the beginning. "Officer Callahan, you are about to discover why patience is sometimes mistaken for weakness." Callahan laughed. "That sounds like a threat." Alicia shook her head slightly. "It is not a threat." She paused briefly before continuing. "It is a warning." Callahan leaned closer, clearly enjoying the moment. "You know what the problem is?" he said quietly. "People like you think a fancy job title makes you untouchable." Alicia met his gaze evenly. "You already saw my title." Callahan shrugged again. "Attorney. That does not scare me." Alicia glanced briefly toward the patrol cruiser before looking back at him. "Then you should not mind if I make one phone call." Callahan chuckled under his breath and stepped back slightly, folding his arms across his chest. "Go ahead," he said. "Call whoever you want." His tone carried the smug certainty of someone who believed the situation could not possibly change. He had no idea that by giving permission for that single phone call, he had just handed Dr. Alicia Grant the one opportunity she needed to end the confrontation in a way he never expected. Officer Brent Callahan leaned casually against the patrol cruiser, arms folded across his chest as he watched Dr. Alicia Grant stand beside the hood with her wrists secured in the handcuffs he had placed there only moments earlier. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Jefferson Square, while the small crowd of onlookers remained gathered near the cafe tables and sidewalk. Phones were still raised, recording the unfolding confrontation. Alicia's legal documents remained scattered across the pavement where they had fallen earlier, the pages shifting slightly whenever a breeze moved through the square. Alicia glanced briefly toward the papers and then back toward Callahan. Despite the cuffs behind her back, her posture remained calm and composed. "May I use my phone?" she asked quietly. Callahan smirked. "I already told you that you could call whoever you want." He pushed himself away from the cruiser and stepped closer, clearly enjoying the audience surrounding them. "But I am curious," he added. Who exactly do you think is going to help you? Alicia said nothing for a moment. Instead, she turned her head slightly toward Officer Tyler Brooks. Officer Brooks, she said calmly, would you mind taking the phone out of my bag so I can make that call? Brooks hesitated, glancing nervously at Callahan before reaching down to the table where her bag still rested near the fallen documents. He pulled out the phone and placed it carefully into her cuffed hands. Callahan laughed softly. This should be interesting. Alicia raised the phone and dialed a number from memory. The crowd grew quiet as the call began ringing. Callahan leaned against the cruiser again, clearly unconcerned. Tell them where you are, he said sarcastically. Maybe they will send a taxi. After a brief moment, the call connected. Alicia spoke in a calm, steady voice. Good afternoon, Victor. I apologize for the interruption. I am currently at Jefferson Square with 2 officers who have detained me without cause. Callahan rolled his eyes and looked toward the people recording. Victor, he repeated mockingly. That must be important. Alicia continued speaking, her tone measured and professional. Yes, Officer Brent Callahan and Officer Tyler Brooks. We are standing outside Maria Delgado's café. She paused for a moment while listening to the response on the other end of the call. The faint sound of traffic passed through the square, while everyone nearby waited to see what would happen next. Callahan's expression remained smug. Let me guess, he said quietly. Victor is going to save the day. Alicia ended the call and lowered the phone. Her calm gaze moved from Callahan to Brooks and then back again. Thank you, she said simply. Callahan chuckled under his breath. That is it, he asked. That was your big move. Alicia nodded once. Yes. The confidence in her voice did not match the humiliation of her situation, and that alone seemed to irritate him. He pushed away from the cruiser again, stepping closer with a dismissive shake of his head. Well, Dr. Grant, he said with a thin smile, you can stand here as long as you like. I am not going anywhere. Behind him, the crowd continued recording quietly, unaware that the phone call they had just witnessed had already begun setting something much larger in motion. The afternoon sun continued drifting across Jefferson Square, casting warm light over the cafe tables and the patrol cruiser, where Dr. Alicia Grant still stood with her hand secured behind her back. The quiet crowd that had gathered remained in place, the low hum of whispered conversations mixing with the occasional sound of passing traffic. Officer Brent Callahan paced slowly in front of the cruiser, clearly enjoying the attention the confrontation had drawn. Every few seconds he glanced toward the people recording with their phones, as if their presence only confirmed the authority he believed he held. Officer Tyler Brooks stood a few steps away, watching both the crowd and his partner with growing unease. The phone call Alicia had just made lingered in the air like a quiet signal that something unseen had already begun moving. Callahan finally stopped pacing and looked directly at her again. Well, he said with a smirk, that did not take long. Alicia remained calm, her shoulders relaxed despite the cuffs resting against her wrists. No, she replied softly. Callahan tilted his head slightly. So, where is Victor? He asked with exaggerated curiosity. Should we expect a helicopter? A few people in the crowd shifted nervously at the sarcasm in his voice. Alicia did not respond immediately. Instead, she looked past him toward the street at the edge of the square, where traffic moved steadily through the afternoon. Her expression remained composed, thoughtful. You still have time to correct this, she said quietly. Callahan laughed again, the sound louder now as he spread his arms slightly toward the crowd. Correct what? He asked. You're the one standing in handcuffs. Brooks stepped closer, lowering his voice. Brent, maybe we should just take the cuffs off and let her go. Callahan turned toward him sharply. Now you want to back off? Brooks hesitated but held his ground. We already made our point. Callahan shook his head slowly and turned back toward Alicia. No, he said firmly. Now we finish this. He reached toward the cruiser door and pulled out a citation pad from the passenger seat. Since you want to make phone calls, he continued, flipping the pad open, let us make this official. He began writing quickly across the page. Obstruction, he muttered while scribbling. Failure to comply. The pen scratched loudly across the paper. Alicia watched him calmly. Officer Callahan, she said again, her voice steady but carrying a quiet weight that drew even the crowd's attention back to her. "When this moment ends, you will remember that I gave you more than one opportunity to stop." Callahan did not even look up from the citation pad. "Save the speeches," he said dismissively. "You should be thinking about court dates instead." Alicia held his gaze once he finally looked up. "You are right about one thing," she said quietly. "This will involve a courtroom." Callahan snorted with amusement. "I look forward to it." He tore the citation sheet from the pad with a quick rip and stepped toward her again, completely convinced that the situation remained entirely under his control. And in that moment, with the crowd still recording and the afternoon still calm, Officer Brent Callahan unknowingly stepped past the final chance he had been given to walk away before the consequences of that single phone call reached him. Officer Brent Callahan stepped forward with the citation still in his hand, the paper fluttering slightly in the warm breeze moving across Jefferson Square. The small crowd remained gathered around the cafe patio and sidewalk, their phones still raised as they recorded the confrontation. Dr. Alicia Grant stood calmly beside the patrol cruiser with her hands cuffed behind her back, her posture steady despite the tension surrounding her. Officer Tyler Brooks watched the situation carefully, his unease growing with every passing second. The quiet after Alicia's phone call felt heavier now, as if the square itself were holding its breath. Then the sound came. A sharp burst of static crackled through Callahan's shoulder radio. The sudden noise cut through the air, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. Callahan glanced down at the radio as another voice pushed urgently through the speaker. "Unit 32, confirm your location immediately." The tone was different from ordinary dispatch traffic. It was sharper, more direct. Callahan frowned slightly and pressed the button on the radio. "Unit 32 at Jefferson Square," he replied. For a brief moment, there was silence. Then the radio came alive again. "Unit 32, remain on scene. Supervisors are en route." Callahan's expression shifted slightly, the smug confidence fading just a fraction. Brooks looked at him immediately. "Supervisors?" he asked quietly. Before Callahan could answer, the radio crackled again. "Officer Brent Callahan, do not detain the individual currently in custody. Repeat, do not detain. Release immediately." The words hung in the air. Several people in the crowd exchanged surprised looks. Callahan stared at the radio as if he had heard something impossible. "Dispatch, confirm," he said into the microphone. Another voice came through the speaker, deeper this time. "This is the Attorney General's office. Release Dr. Alicia Grant immediately." The color drained slowly from Callahan's face. Brooks stepped forward without hesitation and reached for the cuffs behind Alicia's wrists. The metal clicked sharply as he unlocked them. Alicia brought her hands forward calmly, rubbing her wrists lightly before lowering them at her sides. Her expression remained composed, her eyes steady as she looked at Callahan. The officer who had been shouting minutes earlier now stood completely silent. The citation paper slipped slightly in his hand. Alicia reached into her briefcase and pulled out a small leather card holder. She opened it slowly so he could see the identification inside. Civil Rights Attorney, State Legal Advisor to the Office of the Attorney General. Callahan stared at the card without blinking. His breathing slowed, his shoulders stiffening as the full meaning of the moment settled over him. Around them, the quiet crowd continued recording every second. Alicia closed the card holder and returned it to her briefcase. Her voice remained calm. "Officer Callahan," she said softly, "I told you that you still had time to stop." He did not respond. He cannot. The authority he believed protected him had just collapsed under the weight of a single phone call. The silence that followed the radio transmission lingered over Jefferson Square like a sudden shift in the weather. Officer Brent Callahan remained frozen beside the patrol cruiser, the citation still crumpled slightly in his hand, while the realization of what had just happened spread slowly across his face. The crowd around the cafe patio had grown larger now, their phones still raised as they recorded the moment. Officer Tyler Brooks stepped away from Alicia Grant after unlocking the handcuffs, his expression a mixture of relief and disbelief. The faint sound of approaching sirens soon drifted through the square, growing louder with each passing second. Callahan turned his head toward the street, just as two black supervisor vehicles pulled to the curb beside the patrol car. The doors opened quickly, and two senior officers stepped out, their expressions already serious as they approached the scene. One of them, Captain Daniel Morris, stopped directly in front of Callahan and Brooks. His eyes moved briefly toward Dr. Grant before returning to the officers. "What happened here?" he asked calmly. Neither officer answered immediately. Brooks spoke first. "Sir, there was a misunderstanding." Captain Morris held up a hand. "Save it." He turned toward Alicia. "Dr. Grant, I apologize for the way you were treated." Alicia gave a small, composed nod. "Thank you, Captain." Morris turned back toward Callahan, whose earlier confidence had now completely vanished. "Officer Callahan," he said firmly, "hand over your badge." The word struck with quiet finality. The crowd along the sidewalk murmured softly as Callahan hesitated for a moment before slowly unclipping the badge from his uniform. Morris took it without another word. "You and Officer Brooks are both relieved of duty pending immediate investigation," he continued. Brooks lowered his head slightly while Callahan stared at the ground, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The humiliation was complete. Only minutes earlier he had been shouting orders and forcing a woman against the hood of his cruiser. Now he stood surrounded by witnesses as his authority was stripped away in front of everyone who had watched the confrontation unfold. Captain Morris turned once more toward Dr. Grant. "Your documents," he said, gesturing toward the papers scattered across the sidewalk. Brooks quickly knelt down and began gathering them, handing the neatly stacked pages back to her with quiet respect. Alicia accepted the papers calmly and placed them back inside her briefcase. The tension that had filled the square slowly began to dissolve as people lowered their phones and resumed their afternoon routines. Yet the lesson of the moment remained clear to everyone who had witnessed it. Authority built on arrogance can disappear in seconds when confronted by the weight of accountability. The tension that had filled Jefferson Square slowly faded as the supervisor vehicles pulled away and the crowd began drifting back toward their normal routines. Conversations resumed at the café tables, the soft clatter of coffee cups and quiet laughter returning to the patio, as if the confrontation had been nothing more than a brief interruption in an otherwise peaceful afternoon. Dr. Alicia Grant stood calmly beside the small iron table where she had been working earlier, her briefcase resting against the chair while she carefully placed the recovered legal documents back into their folder. The breeze moved gently through the square again, lifting the edges of the café umbrellas while the sounds of city traffic blended into the background. Maria Delgado stepped out from the café doorway once more, this time carrying a fresh cup of coffee. She placed it gently on the table beside Alicia. "On the house," Maria said with a warm smile. Alicia returned the smile and nodded her thanks. "I appreciate that." Maria glanced briefly toward the street where the patrol cruiser had been parked earlier. The space was empty now. "You handled that with more patience than I would have," she said quietly. Alicia sat down again and opened the folder in front of her, smoothing one page carefully. Across the table, "Patience has a way of revealing things," she replied calmly. Around the square, a few of the witnesses who had recorded the incident earlier offered respectful nods as they passed by. Some returned to their seats with a new sense of admiration for the quiet composure they had witnessed. The earlier tension had transformed into something else entirely. A quiet recognition that accountability had arrived without shouting, without chaos, and without revenge. Officer Tyler Brooks stood briefly near the curb before being escorted away by the supervisors, his expression thoughtful as he looked back toward the cafe patio. Meanwhile, the afternoon sun continued drifting slowly across the buildings surrounding Jefferson Square, casting long golden reflections across the pavement. Alicia lifted the coffee cup and took a small sip before returning her attention to the legal documents spread neatly across the table. Her calm focus returned exactly where it had been before the confrontation began, as if the entire incident had simply been another interruption in the steady work she had dedicated her life to. The square itself seemed to breathe again as the ordinary rhythm of the city settled back into place. And in the quiet calm that followed, the lesson of the moment remained clear to everyone who had witnessed it. Real authority does not demand attention through force. It reveals itself through patience, integrity, and the certainty that justice, sooner or later, always finds its way back into the light. When you look back at the moment that unfolded in Jefferson Square, the most revealing detail was not the phone call itself. The most revealing detail was the certainty that Officer Callahan carried before that call was ever made. He believed authority meant control over the moment, the crowd, and the person standing in front of him. Yet what he never considered was that real authority often operates quietly, beyond the narrow view of the person misusing it. Dr. Grant never needed to argue louder or force the situation to change. She simply remained calm long enough for the truth of her position to reach the scene. That contrast between impatience and restraint says something important about power. When authority is guided by ego, it becomes fragile because it depends on intimidation to survive. But when authority is grounded in responsibility, it does not need to prove itself loudly. In this story, the real turning point was not the arrival of supervisors or the removal of a badge. It was the moment when patience quietly dismantled arrogance in full view of everyone watching. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.